Welcome to AmericanDraqon presents lectures on Chinese medicine. My name is Joel Pinner. I'm your host. I'm a doctor of Oriental medicine, a California licensed acupuncturist and herbalist. I'm a professor of Oriental medicine and co-author of the textbook Zongfu Syndromes, Differential Diagnosis and Treatment. Today we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. E. Douglas Kine. Doug is also a doctor of Oriental medicine, a California licensed acupuncturist herbalist, a professor of Oriental medicine, and a personal fitness trainer. Welcome to AmericanDraqon, Doug.
Thank you, Joel. I'm really glad to be here. I'm glad you invited me.
My pleasure. We're here to discuss your new book, Doug, but before we get into that, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you've been up to recently?
Well, I've been doing a lot of sports. I work out every day, and I do historical sword fighting, and I do a lot of swing dancing, which I've been doing since 14 and a half years ago. And of course, a lot of writing.
And that brings us to your new book.
It does.
All right.
Indeed.
The name of the new book is Chinese Medicine for Americans.
Yes, and the subtitle is A Practical Understanding of the Language and Theory as Applied to Common Health Problems in 21st Century United States.
Wow. So it's written for us.
It certainly is.
I bet it's written in English.
It is written in English, I hope. And there are really two main audiences for this book. The first audience, of course, is the general public, Americans who are interested in Chinese medicine, because I want to spread Chinese medicine far and wide, and I think it really applies to the problems that we're facing in this country. And the second audience is my colleagues, fellow licensed acupuncturists in the United States and students.
Great. Why do they need to read your book? What's different about your book that already licensed professionals can use?
Yeah, Chinese Medicine for Americans is a lot like a book that came out in the late 70s called The Web That Has No Weaver by Ted Kapchuk. This is a very standard textbook, and still is. But what makes Chinese medicine unique is that it is specifically for our problems here and now. And it's very easy to understand. So what we have learned, Joel, in school, we went to school together, we were study partners, and what we've learned is Chinese medicine as applied to Maoist China and pre-Maoist China. And in pre-Maoist China, there were what we call deficiencies. Starvation, not clean water, not clean food, no medical, emergency medical facilities, things like this. Problems that in 21st century America, we just really don't deal with. So a lot of things that we learned from textbooks like The Web That Has No Weaver really don't apply to modern life. So Chinese Medicine for America corrects that and really gets us to focus on problems of excess. And the United States is the land of excess. I would call it the capital of excess. All our problems stem from too much.
I obviously read your book, Doug, and I was very impressed by your concept of excess. Would you tell us more about how the book is set up and what you hope to accomplish?
Joel, the book is divided into three parts. The first part concentrates on the fundamentals of Chinese medicine. Concepts like yin and yang, 5 elements, 5 substances, 8 principles, these sorts of things that are very basic and really essential to understanding and using Chinese medicine. And of course, I want people to be able to walk in off the street and read my book and get it, and be able to use these basic building blocks to go further. And further in the book means part 2 and part 3. Part 2 talks about pathology, in other words, disease, things that go wrong in general. And then the last part of part 2 is things that go wrong in this country, in 21st century America. And then part 3 talks about how we deal with this. Now in part 3, I'm not focusing on our techniques that we learned, herbs, acupuncture, acupressure. I'm focusing on a special branch of Chinese medicine that I want to introduce to the public and to our colleagues, and I call it health counseling. Because really, the problems in this country boil down to choices. The choices that we make. We can make healthy choices, and we can make unhealthy choices. Health counseling helps people make healthy choices, obviously. And when we really want to cure a problem, that means get rid of it so it doesn't come back. And for us, that means making healthy choices. So that's really the essence of part 3.
Great, Doug. I agree with you completely. You also introduced a what you call the American syndrome. That's really to me a brilliant concept, and I wish you'd explain it to the audience.
Yeah, the American syndrome really entails 3 habits that we as Americans make or have. We have these lifestyle habits, and they cause most of the disease problems and the health problems that we face. And it boils down to worrying, hurrying, and overeating.
None of us do that here.
Oh no, of course not. But you know, it's ingrained in American culture. It's part of how we live our lives here. And when people come from other countries, immigrants, and they settle here, they very soon learn these habits of worrying, hurrying, and overeating. And by the way, I relate these 3 habits to the Chinese syndromes of liver qi stagnation, heart heat, and spleen damp.
Which you see every day in practice. I know I do.
We've been seeing these, Joel, for 25 years, as long as we've been practicing Chinese medicine. And of course, we have herbs that deal with these syndromes, and we have acupuncture points that deal with these syndromes. But the problem is, if people keep making those choices, they're going to come back. These problems come back. They either come back in the same form, or they'll come back in a different form. Right? For example, heart heat is really all about inflammation. Someone wrote a book called Inflammation Nation a while back, and in it he posits that most of us suffer from inflammatory diseases. It's amazing, they're finding all these inflammatory diseases. Alzheimer's is an inflammatory disease. Cancer can be an inflammatory disease. So many things relate to inflammation, which I relate to heart heat.
Doug, why don't you explain more about the Chinese syndrome of liver qi stagnation?
Sure, Joel. Liver qi stagnation is so common here, it's like air. Almost everyone has liver qi stagnation, and of course we learned that it relates to worrying. It's an interesting thing. People fear the future, which of course doesn't exist, right?
Only the now.
Only the now exists, right. But they fear that future which doesn't exist, and when people fear, and fear unreasonably, they hold on to that anxiety. And when they hold on to that anxiety, they tighten up. So Americans are tightening up in all kinds of areas. I'll tell you, Joel, well, as you know from your experience too, every area of the body can tighten up, and they hold that tightness. You could hold it for 5%, 10% tightness. But when you hold that for a long period of time, bad things happen. Liver qi stagnation. You can tighten up muscles and cause all kinds of muscular problems. You can tighten up every organ. Every organ that has muscles around it, or every organ that is muscular, can tighten up. So for example, tightness in the lungs can lead to asthma. Tightness in the stomach will lead to a nervous stomach. Tightness in the small intestine leads to Crohn's disease. Tightness in the colon leads to colitis or irritated bowel syndrome. I mean, we can go on and on like this. Now, when people relax, this tightness goes away. You know, and this is really the essence of like faith healing and things like that. But it's also really responds so well to acupuncture. You know, and that's acupuncture's main claim to fame, is relieving liver qi stagnation.
That's true.
Yes. Well, and of course we can do that herbally as well. But with health counseling, I teach people in the book to stop worrying and to be in the moment. like our Taoist training has taught us, to be in the moment and to let go of that fear, that chronic fear. And when people do that, all kinds of problems disappear. And when they learn to do that and learn to be in the moment and learn to turn off that worrying switch, which I did about 10 years ago finally. I mean, it took years and years to build up to that point. All kinds of problems disappear. It's amazing.
Right.
Liver qi stagnation, it can be minor problems and it can be deadly problems. And we need to get rid of it.
For those of you who don't know what liver qi stagnation is, I would recommend that you tune into a future class where we'll get into it much more deeply, give you a really good understanding of what liver qi stagnation is. The next syndrome that you talk about, Doug, is heart heat. How does that affect us, and what can we do about it?
Well, heart heat is a syndrome that I almost invented. We have a thing in Chinese medicine we learned about. It's called heart fire. Well, heart fire flares up and then it comes down. So this is a chronic type of heart heat, and it's really the basis of inflammation. All these inflammatory diseases that I talked about earlier, chronic inflammation. You know, the main cause in this country of this chronic inflammation, this heart heat that I call it, is hurrying. And I'm confronted with it constantly in this country. People are hurrying through life. They drive fast, they walk fast, they talk fast, they work fast, they think fast, they do everything fast. They brag about not needing sleep. So people are sleep deprived. Sleep deprivation is it's an epidemic in modern United States. All of this friction, it's really about friction, Joel. Friction causes heat. And if you have too much friction all the time, you're going to have chronic inflammation. These chronic inflammatory diseases are going to crop up. So we have, of course, points on the body for acupuncture, which relieve heat. That's very useful. We have herbs, some very good herbs, all those feverfugals that we use in our formulas to relieve heat. But if people keep hurrying, they're going to keep coming up with inflammatory diseases. So health counseling, part of what health counseling seeks to achieve, is to get people to stop worshiping speed and busyness, to get enough sleep, to take breaks, to stop multitasking, to do things slower, unless you need to. It's sort of like a tennis. I relate it to playing tennis. I used to play tennis.
Right, I remember
we used to play tennis together. Too, right? We played a lot of tennis together. And, you know, on the way to the tennis match, you get in the right-hand lane, you go the speed limit, and you let all these people with heat pass you up. Okay, go on ahead.
When we played, I was the one in the left lane.
But when you get to the match, you walk out calm. You saunter out to the tennis court. You get your ball. You bounce it right, nice and calm, nice and slow. But as soon as that ball is in play, you run fast. You run fast for a purpose. So speed and busyness need to be very purposeful. And then the average point lasts 7 seconds, and then it's back to being calm. It's back to relieving that heat. So this is what we need to teach our patients. This is what Americans need to learn, is to stop being full of heat. Stop being busy all the time. Right? See, he agrees.
This is JJ.
That's
JJ's
way of agreeing.
Yes, JJ thinks we should stop hurrying so much.
That's right.
And I can tell you that I learned that lesson myself, and I feel much better since I've slowed down.
Yes.
I never could allow people to pass me. It was just something about. Now
it's part of that American syndrome.
Right. People can go by. Okay, you're getting in the way. Such a good boy. Okay. The third syndrome that you mentioned in your book is called spleen damp. Would you please explain that a little more?
Yes, spleen damp. Well, Now, we have to realize, of course, that spleen doesn't mean your Western spleen. And by the way, in Chinese medicine, we're talking about liver and heart and spleen. We're not really talking about your Western liver, heart, and spleen. We're talking about your Chinese liver, heart, and spleen. And these are theoretical concepts that allow us to predict things, allow us to tie everything together. So when I say spleen, I'm really talking about the main digestive organ. So we all know that. That's our Chinese lingo that we use. But so that digestive organ, which we will call spleen, needs to be dry and lean. And when we overeat, and by the way, 1/3 of Americans are obese, and another third are classified as overweight. When we overeat, we create what we call a damp spleen. It's also very related to food stagnation. That dampness, which comes from the H2O, by the way, that's bound up molecularly in food, that dampness causes all kinds of health problems. And we know that overweight and obesity is statistically related to all kinds of health problems. And we're always trying to get lean, and we're trying to relieve that dampness. Well, we have herbs, of course, that relieve dampness. We have acupuncture points that relieve dampness. But how are we going to get Americans to stop overeating?
Good question.
Fair question, isn't it?
That's one of the main topics of conversation all over the country.
That's the $64 million question, right? Well, I have a system, what I call hunger awareness training. I teach people essentially in health counseling to get in touch with their own instincts. Your instinct will tell you to stop worrying. Your own instincts will tell you to stop hurrying. And your own eating instincts will tell you to stop overeating. For example, if you're hungry, eat. When you're comfortable, stop. Now, the interesting and fascinating point here is that I've discovered over years of asking people and interviewing patients whether they're hungry or not, it's a fascinating fact that most Americans are never hungry. What we do is we prevent hunger with food, and we're constantly referring to hunger as some dangerous disease that kills people. They died from hunger. Oh my goodness. Well, no one ever died from a feeling, did they?
No.
And that's all that hunger really
They die
is.
from starvation.
They die from starvation. They get sick from malnutrition. Not in this country, but in other countries, in pre-Maoist China, for example. But in pre-Maoist China, they never had to deal with people waiting for hunger. I mean, it was always a problem of getting enough food. So this book, Chinese Medicine for Americans, seeks to correct that. What we need to do is wait for hunger. So I teach people to wait for hunger. And if they're not hungry, well then eat minimally. But the main thing is to trust themselves. The thing about trusting yourself is that you are the expert here in all of these instinctive situations. And when you learn to trust yourself, self-esteem goes up, doesn't it? Yeah. Self-trust is the basis of self-love. When you love yourself, you improve your mental health. This has overflow ramifications in your whole life. When you learn to trust yourself, you're no longer insecure. You're no longer bouncing from this expert to that expert. And what I've noticed is that Americans are obsessed with the wrong question. The wrong question is what to eat. Oh, please, doctor, tell me what to eat. Everyone comes to this is their first question. Please, I don't know what to eat. People tell me this, people tell me that. Please tell me what to eat. My answer is, that is of tertiary importance. The first question to ask is whether to eat. The second question is how much to eat. Because it is scientifically proven that there is no such thing as fattening food. There's no such thing. There's no food that makes you fat. And there's no food that makes you lean. It's all about calories. Calories, of course, is the energy contained in food. And when you look at fat stores, what is fat but stored calories? Stored food. In Chinese medicine, we would call that food stagnation. That's related to dampness, a damp spleen. So, the heavier someone is, the more fat they're carrying, the less likely they are to feel hunger. And in fact, hunger is the message from the body. It's not telling you to reach in the refrigerator and eat. It's telling you to go out and work. Hunger is the message for animals to get out from under that nice shade tree and go out and find food. So hunger is not associated with disease or illness or weakness or headaches or irritability or anything that prevents you from working with other human beings, going out there and finding food. I always ask people, you're hungry, huh? Well, hunger should enable you to go out 2 miles and dig up roots and work for a couple hours and bring them back to the village where it will be cooked into this fabulous feast, this evening feast. Hunger is an empty feeling in the stomach area. So when people say, I ask people, are you hungry? They say, yeah, sure. I say, well, where do you feel it? I don't know. Well, that's not hunger, is it? That's appetite. Appetite is the desire for food. Hunger is the physical feeling that says go out and work. And it's not located down here, and it's not noises in the abdomen, and it's not somewhere else. It's not in the head. It's in the stomach area, which is where the food goes. That's the essence of hunger awareness training, and this is all detailed in my book, Chinese Medicine for Americans.
That's fascinating, Doug, and very, very concise and well put. Thank you very much.
And you know, it's just amazing how simple all of this is. It's not rocket science. It doesn't take a huge intellect to figure it out, but nobody else seems to be saying it. I'm just stunned that nobody else is saying this. And when I read these scientific studies, scientists don't even ask people, are you hungry? Where do you feel it? What does it feel like? They just assume that if you're eating, you're hungry. But of course, this is, from our experience, this is simply not true.
We learn to eat 3 meals a day, no matter what.
We learn to eat
At the same
7
time.
meals a day, 5 meals a day. Breakfast is the most important. There are 3 reasons for eating that are unnatural, and our heads are full of this. Intellectual reasons. Breakfast is the most important reason for eating, the most important meal of the day. Physical reasons, like a burning stomach, for example. Food will sit down on top of that burning stomach and push that heat down. But then it creates more food stagnation. And when something stagnates, it's pounding against the barrier, creating friction, creating more heat. And so you have this vicious feedback loop. This is stomach fire.
Right, acid regurgitation.
Acid regurgitation, GERD, for example. This is what people are doing. They're pushing it down with food. It stagnates because the body doesn't want it, creating more heat. The heat rises up. They eat more food to push it down.
Very good. So there's a third reason, Doug?
Yeah, Joel, that third reason is emotions. Emotions that we're uncomfortable with. You know, there are 4 basic emotions and many variations of that. Mad, glad, sad, and scared. And we are uncomfortable in this country with those emotions. We will use food to push those down. And there's a very interesting fact, too. It's not just the food pushing it down. It's not just the break time that you need to eat food, which calms you down. It's the fact that fat, which we would call dampness or food stagnation, is a very strong sedative agent. It's a buffering agent. It buffers our spirit. You know, Western medicine has found that fat cells secrete estrogen, a type of estrogen called estriol. That estrogen is a very powerful sedative. It sedates us in 3 ways, and it works 24 hours a day. It works to create more endorphins. It releases serotonin. It's also a vasodilator in the brain, so it releases that heat from anxiety. It releases that heat in the brain. So this is why people, when they do a crash diet, they'll suddenly lose 30, 40 pounds of fat. They're climbing the walls. They're just going crazy. You know, I just read a study the other day that people who lose weight, who diet, increase their smoking. Their smoking goes way up, way higher than they thought, than it was previously thought. That's because we're using smoke also. We're using nicotine to calm down. So that's why people who do these crash diets, they don't last. That's why these diets don't work. All these diet books that we've been barraged with for the last 20 years, they don't work because they're not increasing self-esteem. They're not working on mental health. They're not changing these basic habits that we have, worrying and hurrying essentially, that create this anxiety that we need to calm down, that we need food to calm down with.
So basically, are you saying that food is an addiction similar to heroin, or?
Well, you know, it's not really in the same category. I would say overeating is an addiction. It's very interesting. I read a study that they've done brain scans. You know, they've looked at the brain as it responds to various stimulus, and they found that the same area of the brain lights up in response to heroin and overeating. It's that
Right.
Yeah, that feeling. Yeah. So overeating is really the addiction.
So, I had a patient who was hypoglycemic, and I suggested that she go through the hypoglycemia because, to my way of thinking, especially after reading your book, to my way of thinking, the hypoglycemia was basically withdrawal symptoms from overeating. And she was afraid to do that.
Right.
She was afraid to do that. She got to the point where she started having these withdrawal symptoms, and she had to eat her 2 grams of protein and her 6 grams of this and whatever to stop these withdrawals. And I told her that it was similar to heroin. In other words, heroin, you can live a long time as long as you prevent those withdrawal symptoms. Those withdrawal symptoms can be scary.
Yes, they can. And you know what she's doing, and we've run into this hypoglycemia thing. This is an American disease, by the way, hypoglycemia. Nobody else suffers from this common form of hypoglycemia. What's happening is the adrenal glands are on high, and they're secreting too much epinephrine, which of course is for fight or flight. That's the emergency response. Why? Because people are hurrying and worrying all the time in this country. And so what do they turn to? Food. Why? Because food is glorified in this country. Food is the all-purpose remedy for everything in this country. It's not like heroin, it's not illegal, it's not like cigarettes, which is
Socially unacceptable.
yeah, socially unacceptable. Food is always socially acceptable. And they're told also by conventional doctors that they have this disease called hypoglycemia, and they need to eat 7 meals a day. And of course, diet book authors also suffer from hypoglycemia, and they're eating 7 meals a day, and it works for them, all right? So it works. So they tell people, they give this advice, you need to eat constantly. The problem is the basic situation is not being addressed, the hurrying and the worrying. So you're very right, Joel. What we need to learn is how to help our patients learn calmness. Because really, we don't need to be happy all the time. You know, you can't be happy without also being unhappy. This is from our Taoist training. What we need is calmness. That calmness that you get when you're sitting in a movie theater, for example, and you see the movie and you feel the mad, sad, glad, scared, and all the emotions and everything, but inside you know, hey, it's just a movie, right? It really is just a movie. And it's the same thing with life. Hey, I feel all this stuff and everything's going on, but really, I have that peace of mind inside, and I'm not going to sacrifice it for anything. This is what we, as practitioners of Chinese medicine, are eminently qualified to teach people. It's because of our training in Taoist philosophy, our training in being in the moment, our understanding of liver qi stagnation, heart heat, and spleen damp. And this is our special gift to Americans, besides our techniques of herbology, acupuncture, and acupressure.
That was fascinating, Doug. Thanks. I really enjoyed hearing you talk about that, just like I enjoyed reading your book.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Joel. I really enjoyed being here.
Oh, it was my pleasure. I hope the audience enjoyed hearing what you had to say. I can't imagine that they didn't. So you have a practice here in Los Angeles?
Yes, I do. I practice Chinese medicine in West LA.
And obviously use acupuncture?
Yes, acupuncture, medical massage, herbology, and of course health counseling. And I treat a full range of problems, everything except medical emergencies.
Great. And you have a website? I know you told it at the beginning. Why don't you tell us again?
www.drkihn.com.
And people can contact you on your website, ask you questions?
Yes, there's a page there to ask the doctor, and they're free to, I welcome people to email me or call me with their questions or health concerns.
Thanks again, Doug. That was really fascinating. And thank you for joining us on American Dragon Presents Lectures on Chinese Medicine. Please join us for future lectures where we'll be interviewing other practitioners of Chinese medicine, and we'll be presenting lectures on the basics so that you'll understand more about what we're talking about. Thanks again. See you soon.
Scene 7B, take 4.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us on American Dragon Presents Lectures on Chinese Medicine. That was a fascinating interview with Dr. Kine, and we expect to have more interviews with interesting doctors of Chinese medicine. And Jesus.
That's too good.
That's got to be part of the outtake. You got to do a whole thing of outtakes.
Your crown chakra is just exploding for him.
Okay.